What's happening, everybody? It's me, cannabis industry lawyer Tom Howard. We're going to talk about how to raise funds for your cannabis company on today's webinar. This will be three main webinars in the sense that the first, we're going to talk about it in overarching how to raise funds, and then we're going to drill into the last 2 points. The first of the points will be underwriting for debt markets. We'll talk about the debt markets. And then the third point, the last point, will be underwriting for the equity markets. Those would be private offerings that your company can sell to raise itself some funds. Here's my contact info. Hopefully you guys have tuned into the channel before, Cannabis Legalization News. You can just press the like button and then subscribe if you haven't. I'd be shocked if you haven't. Those are my social medias and a little bit about me. Why do I have the ability to go ahead and do a presentation about how to fund your cannabis company? After I got out of law school in 2008, and while I was in law school in 2005 through 8, I learned about business and I was like, this is great. So I wanted to become a stockbroker, and I did in October of 2008. It was just wrong place, wrong time. Everybody in that industry got fired, and I wanted to use that understanding of the education that I had from law and the education that I had from stocks and bonds and Series 7 kind of shit, and how you price things, and use that to kind of do what I can do now, which is basically some underwriting and some investment bankering, which is not really a word, bankering, for people in the cannabis industry that have licenses that are trying to figure out how to raise capital, because it can be quite complex and convoluted, and they don't really teach this stuff in, well, they do maybe in law school and B school, but other than that, if you're a CFA, maybe you've seen it. If you understand how to calculate the value of a share of a security, or if you know how to calculate bond valuation and bond yields. We aren't going to be talking about that today. We are going to be talking about fundraising. If you want those materials that we're going to be going after, I have that. This one, of course, says that getting the license can be the easy part, especially in New Jersey. Most cannabis companies need to raise funds, which of course is true even in New Jersey or in, well, any state. That's the rub. And so, like, if they make the state too easy to get a license in there, you might not want to go and capitalize your business. You may want to try to bootstrap. It's one thing to try to bootstrap a law firm. It's another thing entirely to try to bootstrap a cannabis company in especially a highly competitive marketplace like a Michigan or like a Colorado, where it's just seen a lot of consolidation over the past decade, which is only the first decade. The ability to be able to raise funds for your company is extremely important. So let's go over the types of funding that are available to your companies. Now, cannabis companies are not all that different. They are just illegal. Self-funding, debt financing, securities financing. The self-funding, that is no one. Like, again, it says 9% of Americans are millionaires. And then even if they have that money, I would still say don't self-fund. And we'll explain that in a bit. And then, well, don't entirely self-fund. Self-fund to the extent that you reasonably need to. And then if you do not do that beyond, we'll talk about that in just a moment. The third one is the securities. Now, the securities markets are huge. The securities markets, including the debt securities. Like, I want to say the stocks, publicly traded or over the counter, 20 trillion, maybe not right now. They've been selling off lately in the United States market, at least about 15 to 20 trillion. Let's get that 5 trillion right there. And then you have private debt markets, or debt markets that aren't bonds, and that's at about 12.5 trillion. And then you have the bond market, which is, we'll go over what bonds are during the securities financing portion, which is about 47 trillion. So out of all the equities that are out there, there's a lot more in debt, and there's good reason for it. Let's talk a little bit about debt and how debt can make your company more profitable, which most people get scared about. They're like, wait, debt's going to make my company more profitable? And so I have a little bit of a example here with a hypothetical $10 million startup costs. And so you're going to have a grow. Let's say it's a craft grow. So it also has extraction and goes up to 14,000 square foot of flowering canopy, which is usually around like tier 2-ish level on the East Coast, 10,000 to 15,000 square feet of flowering canopy, for example. Not a small build, thousands of plants, millions of dollars, maybe $10 million in your startup costs. And so you could have one guy just put the whole $10 million down, right? Now, you can find financing out there. We can help you find financing out there, at cannabisindustrylawyer.com if you want to find me on the internet, or that's my IG handle. You might be able to find 30%, 20% down if it's a construction loan or the types of other loan products that are kind of more popular in Europe, but out there. And then you have your down payment money. And then that comes with 3 million down, 7 million financed. Let's say it's a 10% rate of interest and it's cannabis. You'd be lucky if it's 10%. That's about $700,000 a year. So you'd have your debt service that you would pay, which of course is interest. So it's deductible. So you have your down payment and then you have your interest payment. And then after that, you'd be profitable. But if you put the whole $10 million down, do you have to return the whole $10 million to the investor before you have a dollar of profit? Now, if these future cash flows that you're going to be able to have are going to be able to service the debt. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but these future cash flows are what really give you your credit rating or your credit worthiness. We're going to also go over commercial banking, which is something that I did after I became a stockbroker. It was a lot of commercial banking. I was a lawyer for them. The self-funding. Again, I stress not to do this. And so instead, what you should do is run some models and see how much debt your company can handle. Now, in the 1980s, which were a strange decade, spreadsheets were just coming into vogue, and you could figure out from those how much money a possible LBO target made every year, cash. And so you would be able to then estimate how much cash that thing could fund towards debt. And then you would load all that stuff up on debt and use that to buy it out. So those are the old leverage buyouts. Now, they were able to get done because they could finance debt from cash flows. Don't you have a fiduciary duty to maximize profit? And so if you have a debt line item instead of a huge capital investment that you have to repay, then you'd be able to have much more profitable of a business. Sure, in theory, you'd want to pay off that so you're paying more than just the interest. But that interest is tax advantaged. And then it also allows you to say that you have a profit before you have to repay all of the equity infused by that one particular shareholder. And so that's one of the reasons why you want to use debt. You just have your debt service with your cash flow, and then everything else on top of it is considered profits. And of course, creditors get paid first. It's another reason why people might want to consider debt. So these are the debt markets. There's no shortage of lenders that are out there trying to find cannabis licenses and then loan them money at double-digit rates with a lot of points for brokers or for origination. And that's just kind of where you're at, because these debt markets aren't like the $12.5 trillion that was in Q1 of 2022 that are in non-financial business debts. i.e. not bonds, loans with banks and whatnot. Now, most of these banks that you have in cannabis are private equity funds, family offices. It's not an FDIC insured lender. It can't be. So there's no SBA loans. If you have an SBA loan and you want to put your facility or your operations into that, you're going to cause a default in that mortgage and most mortgages. And as a result, a lot of private lending and private banking is what's fueling the cannabis industry's growth, not the mom and pop banks, not the community banks, not even the big banks. Banks won't touch this stuff because it literally is money laundering to have a bank account as a plant-touching cannabis license. Fortunately, they have not been enforcing that aspect of the law since 2014 because of a memo that came out of the Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's quite boring. There's a way to compliantly launder the money, at least for state licensed cannabis companies. It's one of the reasons why Clarence Thomas calls our laws more episodic than coherent. And that's not necessarily the best thing, because these markets, these credit markets, are still there for regular businesses. They're just even easier to access. So these other markets, the non-traditional lending markets, they're going to have a higher, juicier interest rate. You're going to have to pay that, but welcome to the cannabis industry. For example, you can even get like construction loans. There's construction loans out there to start up your business, but you usually have to prepay all the interest first. You're going to pay about 20% of the total project down in an account. That's going to go to interest over the course of maybe 4 years, let's say, as you get up and going. However, you have to realize how your financial models really work. We go over those a lot at the office over at Collateral Base, because you need to see the cash flowing, or at least the pro forma aspect of the cash flowing, to be able to determine how much debt you can service, and then also what a reasonable discounted cash flow analysis valuation is of that business that is cash flowing. These things are complex, but it's not the options pricing algorithm, at least. And then there's equity financing. Equity is different than debt. Even though, like a bond, what's a bond? A bond is a promise to pay. It's very similar to a promissory note, like a loan, but they are two different methods of kind of doing the same thing. A bond, let's say, have them in increments of $1,000. You could sell $10,000 worth of bonds or borrow $10,000. That loan would have an interest rate and a payment schedule, and then it might be very truly like a bond if it's interest only. If you're only paying the interest, just like in a bond, you would be paying the coupon payments or the interest payments, and then upon maturity, you pay off the bond. Now, sometimes a promissory note might have the same thing, where it's just paying interest, and then at the end of it, you pay off the note, or perhaps it converts into a class of equity or some type of shares. Now, they also have that in bonds. They call it mezzanine bonds or mezzanine financing. We're going to go over the capital stack here later. These are all the things in the Swiss Army knife that is the financial ability of your company to be able to sell crap besides weed. I mean itself, I mean debt, I mean portions of its future cash flows, all of those types of things. And if you see the license that you fought so hard to get as having all these other rights and potential avenues for cash flows, raising money isn't easy. It especially is not easy in the cannabis industry. And so you really need to have an understanding of what is available for you. But that's what a mezzanine debt is. You could have it be a convertible note. You could have it be a mezzanine bond, and it gives that owner a right to buy in, typically for a discount. And then in the case of mezzanine bonds, it comes with a warrant. We'll be talking about those as well later on. And then you get your equity valuations. Why is a share of a stock's price? We aren't going to go over that specific formula, and there is a formula out there. Of course, it could be garbage in, garbage out. It's an algorithm. We are going to go over the discounted cash flow analysis a little bit. I'm not even going to show you like it on an Excel being calculated. Essentially, what that really means is that you average the amount of the cash flow ability, and then you give it a terminal value, like once it gets up and going, the terminal valuation is like what you think that cash flow is into perpetuity, or for lack of a better term, into the future. And you average all those together, and that gives you a particular valuation. Sometimes it's expressed in terms of EBITDA. So like, 7 EBITDA. Dispensaries usually, they do, you could also calculate that out, but they usually do more of a multiple of top line revenue. So like a dispensary might sell for 1.5x top line revenue, but then if you crunch all the numbers, that might actually be 5 to 7 EBITDA. We're going to go over all that type of stuff, but that is the general explanation of what we're going to be going over, and the options that are available to cannabis license holders to capitalize their business. The name of the company is Collateral Base. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. If you have any questions about how to raise capital, if you're working on any and you need help with your models, you need help with your securities offerings, and then your business plan so it makes sense, and what you're offering and how to paper it, give us a ring. Here's our contact information again. I do appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I'll see you guys on Sunday when I read the news with Miggy. Bye. All right.
Brown chicken, brown cow.